Hey guys, tonight we're heading somewhere so cold that your eyelashes freeze together when you blink, where the air itself seems to crack and splinter around you, and where the locals have a saying, "There's no such thing as bad weather, only bad clothing," which is absolutely a lie they tell themselves to cope with living in what is essentially nature's walk-in freezer set to kill. We're talking about Yakutia, officially the Sakha Republic, a region in northeastern Siberia where winter temperatures routinely plummet to -71 degrees Celsius, -96 degrees Fahrenheit, making it the coldest permanently inhabited place on planet Earth. And tonight, you're going to experience what it's really like to survive there, including the part where, yes, this actually happens, you might find yourself pressed against a freshly killed animal's warm organs just to keep your core temperature above clinically dead. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from and what time it is there. Are you bundled up in Norway at 2 a.m.? Sweating through a summer night in Sydney? I love seeing how this little community spans the globe. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You step off the small aircraft onto the frozen tarmac of Yakutsk, the capital of the Sakha Republic, and immediately, within seconds, you understand that you've made a terrible mistake. The cold doesn't just touch you, it assaults you. It finds every microscopic gap in your clothing and pours through like liquid nitrogen. Your nose hairs freeze solid on your first inhale, creating a strange prickling sensation that would be funny if it wasn't genuinely alarming. You exhale, and your breath doesn't just fog. It crystallizes into tiny ice particles that locals call the whisper of stars, a poetic name for what is essentially your own moisture betraying you and turning into airborne shrapnel. It's early December, which means you've arrived at the beginning of winter, not the middle, not the worst of it, the beginning. Right now, it's a balmy -42 degrees Celsius. In 6 weeks, it'll be 20 or 30 degrees colder. You watch a local woman stride past you wearing what looks like a marshmallow suit made from reindeer hide, her face almost entirely obscured except for a small slit for her eyes. She's carrying grocery bags like this is a casual Tuesday, which for her, it is. You're wearing the warmest coat you own, something that cost you $300 and has expedition grade printed on the label, and you might as well be naked. The city of Yakutsk sprawls before you, a strange collision of Soviet-era apartment blocks and modern buildings, all of them sitting on stilts. Not metaphorical stilts, actual concrete pillars that elevate every structure a meter or two off the ground. This is because Yakutsk is built entirely on permafrost, ground that has been frozen solid for thousands of years and will remain frozen forever, or at least until climate change gets its way. If you built directly on this permafrost, the heat from your building would melt the ground beneath it, and your apartment block would slowly sink into the earth like a depressed mammoth into a tar pit. So everything sits on stilts, creating an eerie effect where the city seems to hover slightly above its own shadow. You make your way to your accommodation, a small apartment rented through a local contact, and the journey involves shuffling quickly from heated space to heated space like some sort of Arctic Frogger game. The taxi is running, engine never turned off, because turning off an engine in Yakutsk winter is how you end up with a very expensive metal sculpture instead of a vehicle. Historians still argue whether the first settlers of this region were incredibly brave or simply lost. But either way, they looked at this frozen hellscape and thought, yeah, this'll do. Inside the apartment, you peel off your inadequate layers and examine your new home base. It's warmer than outside, obviously, but still cold enough that you can see your breath if you stand near the windows. The walls are thick, insulated with materials that probably include asbestos and Soviet-era optimism. There's a small kitchen, a bedroom with a bed piled high with furs and blankets, and a bathroom where the pipes are wrapped in heating cables to prevent them from freezing solid. You turn on the tap and wait, and wait. Eventually, water sputters out, having traveled through heated underground pipes that represent one of the city's most impressive engineering achievements. Your local contact, Mikhail, arrives an hour later. He's a stocky man in his 50s, born and raised in Yakutia, and he finds your expensive expedition coat adorable in the way you might find a child's drawing adorable, sweet, but fundamentally misunderstanding reality. Tomorrow, he says in thickly accented English, we go to village, real Yakutia. You will need different clothes. He's brought these clothes with him. Reindeer hide boots that come up to your thighs, pants made from horse leather with the fur turned inward, a coat that appears to be constructed from several entire reindeer, and a hat that is less a hat and more a full head enclosure with a face opening roughly the size of a dollar bill. You spend that first night in Yakutsk researching what you've gotten yourself into. Yakutia. Officially, the Sakha Republic covers over 3 million square kilometers, making it larger than India, yet it holds fewer than 1 million people. It's a land of extremes. The coldest temperature ever recorded in an inhabited place was minus 67.8 degrees Celsius in the village of Oymyakon in 1933. Though locals insist it's gotten colder since then, temperatures that weren't officially recorded because the measuring equipment literally broke. The village of Verkhoyansk hit minus 69.8 degrees Celsius in 1892. These aren't just numbers. They represent a cold so profound that it changes the behavior of matter itself. At minus 40 degrees Celsius and below, steel becomes brittle and can shatter like glass. Rubber loses all flexibility and crumbles. Batteries die almost instantly. If you throw a cup of boiling water into the air, it vaporizes before hitting the ground, creating a spectacular cloud of ice crystals that looks like magic but is actually just physics being dramatic. The locals have 100 different words for snow and ice. Not because they're linguistically obsessive, but because knowing the difference between ice that will support your weight and ice that looks solid but will absolutely kill you is a survival skill. The Sakha people, the indigenous inhabitants who make up about half of Yakutia's population, have been surviving here for over 1,000 years. They're primarily descended from Turkic horse herders who migrated north, which raises the obvious question. Why? Why would anyone migrate north into increasing cold? The prevailing theory is that they were pushed by conflicts and competition in the south, gradually moving into territories that other groups found uninhabitable, until they reached a place so hostile that nobody else wanted it. Congratulations, you've found safety through geographic misery. But here's the thing that keeps you awake that first night, lying under a pile of blankets in your stilted apartment. People don't just survive here. They live here. They raise children here. They fall in love, have birthday parties, complain about their jobs, and watch television here. There are schools and hospitals and coffee shops in Yakutsk. There's a permafrost research center where scientists study ground that's been frozen for 500,000 years. There's a mammoth museum displaying creatures that died in this same cold tens of thousands of years ago, preserved so perfectly that their meat was technically still edible when found, though the researchers who tasted it reported it was not great. You drift toward sleep thinking about warmth. Not abstract warmth, but specific, desperate warmth. The warmth of a fire, the warmth of another body, the warmth of an animal you've just killed, its blood still hot, its organs still generating heat through chemical processes that will continue for minutes after death. In Yakutia, warmth isn't a comfort. It's a currency, a resource, a constant negotiation with thermodynamics. And tomorrow, you'll begin to understand just how far humans will go to keep that negotiation in their favor. Outside your window, the temperature continues to drop. It's now minus 45 degrees Celsius. The city lights reflect off the ice fog that perpetually hangs over Yakutsk in winter, created by the moisture from human habitation instantly freezing in the air. It gives the city an ethereal glow, like you're living inside a snow globe designed by someone with a very dark sense of humor. Somewhere out there, beyond the city limits, the true wilderness waits, the taiga forest frozen solid, and beyond that, the tundra, where the cold becomes absolute and the only warm things are the animals until they're not anymore. You pull the blankets tighter and sink into sleep, your last conscious thought being a simple one. Warmth is life. Everything else is just the space between you and death, and in Yakutia, that space is very, very thin. You wake to darkness. Not the cozy darkness of a winter morning elsewhere, but the absolute darkness of a place where the sun has given up. It's 9 a.m., and outside your window, it could just as easily be midnight. In December, this far north, the sun makes a brief, apologetic appearance around 11 a.m., drags itself weakly across the southern horizon for about 3 hours, and then surrenders back into the void. This is your new reality. Living in a world where daylight is a rumor and vitamin D is something you get from pills, not stars. Mikhail arrives with breakfast, frozen fish, black bread, and tea so strong it could probably strip paint. We eat, then we drive, he announces. The fish is stroganina, raw frozen whitefish sliced paper thin and eaten while still frozen. You're supposed to dip it in salt and eat it immediately. Tastes like, well, like frozen fish, which is exactly what it is. But there's something primal about it, something that connects directly to the people who first figured out that in Yakutia, refrigeration isn't a technology, it's just living. The drive to the village takes 6 hours, though drive is a generous term for what you're doing. Mikhail's vehicle is a UAZ, a Russian-made off-road truck that looks like a shoebox with delusions of grandeur. The road, and again, road is generous, is a winter track carved across frozen rivers and through forests. In summer, this route is impassable, a boggy nightmare of permafrost melt. In winter, the rivers become highways, their surfaces frozen solid enough to support fully loaded trucks. You drive across the Lena River, one of the longest rivers in the world, and try not to think about the fact that beneath 3 feet of ice, there's flowing water, and beneath your truck, there's a gap between survival and a very cold, very final bath. As you drive, Mikhail tells you the story or stories because there are several versions of how his ancestors came here. My people, Saka people, we come from south, he explains, one hand on the wheel, the other gesturing broadly at the frozen landscape. Long time ago, maybe 1,000 years, maybe more. We ride horses, we follow grass for horses, and we come north, north, north. He grins. And then we think, this is stupid cold. But we already here, so we stay. The actual history is more complex and considerably more debated among scholars. The Saka people speak a Turkic language that's related to Turkish, Uzbek, and other Central Asian languages, which is bizarre when you consider they live thousands of kilometers away from those regions, in a climate that would kill a Central Asian horseherder in about 15 minutes. The prevailing archaeological theory suggests that Proto-Saka groups began migrating northward from the Lake Baikal region around the 9th or 10th century CE, possibly fleeing from the upheavals caused by various Mongolic and Turkic empire expansions. But here's where it gets interesting. Why did they keep going north? Most migration patterns show people moving toward more hospitable environments, not away from them. Historians still argue whether the Saka migration was a gradual drift over centuries or a more rapid displacement caused by military pressure from southern rivals. Some scholars point to Saka oral histories that describe conflicts with other groups, suggesting they were pushed into increasingly marginal territories until they found a land so hostile that no one else would fight them for it. A sort of congratulations, you can have it approach to territorial acquisition. What's not debated is what they found when they arrived. A landscape of such extreme cold that it should have killed them all within the first winter. Temperatures that made metalworking nearly impossible, hunting extraordinarily difficult, and agriculture completely out of the question. The taiga forest they passed through, the same forest you're driving past now, all frost-covered larches and silent, frozen pines, was marginally survivable. But the Saka pushed beyond even this, into the river valleys where the cold pooled and concentrated, where winter temperatures could drop 50 degrees below what their ancestors in Central Asia had ever experienced. We bring horses, Mikhail continues. This is important. Other people here, Evenks, Yukagir, they have reindeer. Good for snow, good for tundra. But horses? Horses are crazy to bring here. He laughs. But Saka are stubborn. We teach horses to survive. They learn to dig through snow for grass. They grow thick fur. They become Yakutian horses, small, fat, very tough, like Saka people. The Yakutian horse is indeed one of the strangest and most impressive examples of rapid mammalian adaptation. These stocky animals, standing only about 13 hands high, develop the ability to survive without shelter in temperatures below -60 degrees Celsius. Their coats grow extraordinarily thick, up to 15 centimeters of fur in winter, and their metabolism adjusts to require less food than their southern cousins. They can paw through snow up to 60 centimeters deep to reach the dried grass beneath. Genetic studies suggest this adaptation happened over just 40 or 50 generations, an evolutionary blink that speaks to the extreme selective pressure of the Yakutian environment. Adapt or die, and die quickly. But horses weren't enough. The Saka also brought cattle, another seemingly insane decision. Cows in one of the coldest places on Earth? Yet they managed it, developing the Saka cattle breed, animals that can survive outdoors through winters that would kill European dairy cows in hours. These weren't animals kept for milk primarily, but for meat, fat, and in the most desperate times, warmth. A cow is a large mammal, and a large mammal is a furnace producing heat that, in extremis, could be shared. You pass through what Mikhail calls a summer village, a collection of abandoned wooden structures, empty now, waiting for the brief thaw when families will return to their traditional pastoral sites. The buildings are small, dark, and impossibly remote. My grandfather born in place like this, Mikhail says, 70 kilometers from any other people. In winter, family alone. If you get sick, if you get hurt, he shrugs. You fix yourself or you die. No ambulance, no phone, just you and cold and whatever you can do. This isolation shaped Saka culture in profound ways. They developed a shamanic tradition that emphasized self-reliance and practical knowledge alongside spiritual practice. A shaman wasn't just someone who communicated with spirits. They were a doctor, veterinarian, psychologist, and community organizer rolled into one. They needed to know which plants could reduce fever, almost none, in a place where plants barely exist, how to set broken bones, how to help a horse give birth in a blizzard, and how to keep an entire community from succumbing to the despair that comes with 4 months of darkness. The Saka also developed a gift-giving culture that seems generous until you realize it's actually a survival insurance system. You give lavishly when you have excess because next winter, next crisis, you might be the one who needs help. A family that slaughtered a horse would distribute meat to neighbors not out of pure altruism, but because creating social debt meant creating social bonds, and social bonds meant survival. In a land where the environment is actively trying to kill you, your neighbors are the only thing standing between you and death. Better to keep them well-fed and obligated. The sun makes its brief appearance around noon, a pale disk that barely clears the horizon, casting long, dramatic shadows across the snow. Everything turns gold and pink and purple, a color palette that seems too beautiful for a place this deadly. You stop to stretch your legs, carefully, because at minus 50 degrees Celsius, you can't stay outside longer than a few minutes without your extremities starting to freeze. The air is so cold it feels thick, like you're breathing some denser version of atmosphere. Each inhale hurts. Each exhale creates a cloud of ice crystals that catches the low sunlight and sparkles like glitter. Mikhail points to the horizon. See that? That is where my people decide to live. Not in forest where there is wood, where there is some protection. In valley, by river, where cold is worst. He grins at your expression. Crazy, yes? But river gives fish. Valley gives grass for horses. And cold. He shrugs. Cold is everywhere. Cannot escape cold. So you pick place with food, not place with less cold. This is actually a crucial point that modern researchers have validated. The Saka settled primarily in the river valleys of central Yakutia, particularly along the Lena River and its tributaries. Exactly the places where cold air pooled and temperatures were lowest. But these valleys also had the most productive grasslands during the brief summer, the best fishing, and the flattest terrain for horse herding. The Saka made a calculated trade-off: endure worse cold in exchange for better access to resources. It's the kind of grim calculus that only makes sense when all your options are terrible and you're just choosing the least terrible. You climb back into the truck, your face already numb, and Mikhail drives on. The landscape is hypnotic in its monotony. Frozen river, forest, frozen river, forest, occasional glimpse of distant mountains. You see no animals, no birds, no signs of life except the occasional track in the snow that Mikhail identifies with casual expertise. Wolf, 3 days ago. Or sable, hunting mice under snow. Life exists here, but it's hidden, conserving energy, waiting. You know what Saka people say about first ancestors? Mikhail asks. We say they follow a white deer north. Magic deer that leads them to Promised Land. Promised Land turns out to be coldest place on Earth. He laughs, a deep belly laugh that fogs the windshield. This is very Saka story. Promised Land, but also suffering. Beauty, but also death. We are romantic people, but also realistic people. We know life is hard. So we make jokes, we tell stories, and we survive. As the brief day fades back into night around 3 p.m., You think about those first Saka families arriving here 1,000 years ago. Imagine that first winter, the shock of cold beyond anything they'd experienced, the desperate scramble to build shelter, to keep animals alive, to keep themselves alive. Some must have perished, frozen, starved, or simply given up. But some survived, and those survivors passed on not just their genes but their knowledge. This is how you build in permafrost, this is how you hunt in darkness, this is how you stay warm when warmth seems impossible. And among that knowledge, certainly, was the most extreme measure. When nothing else works, when you're caught in the open and freezing, when death is minutes away, you can survive by sharing warmth with an animal, even one you've just killed. Especially one you've just killed, because for a brief window, that carcass holds more heat than anything else in this frozen world. The village appears suddenly, a cluster of low wooden structures that seem to grow organically from the frozen earth. This isn't Yakutsk with its stilted apartment blocks and modern infrastructure. This is traditional Saka territory, where people live much as their ancestors did, with a few concessions to the 21st century like satellite dishes and diesel generators. Mikhail pulls up to a house that looks like it was constructed by someone who'd been told about right angles but never actually seen one. The walls lean slightly, the roof sags in the middle, and the whole structure appears to be held together by prayer and excellent craftsmanship, in that order. "My cousin's place," Mikhail announces. "You stay here. Learn how we build, how we live." His cousin, Nikolai, emerges from the house wearing so many layers he's practically spherical. He greets you with a handshake that nearly crushes your fingers, not from aggression, but from the sheer necessity of maintaining grip strength when your hands are encased in fur mittens the size of catcher's mitts. The house is partially underground, or more accurately, it's built into a depression scraped into the permafrost, with walls that extend both above and below the natural ground level. This is the traditional Balagan style, though this particular structure has been modified with modern materials. "Cannot build normal house here," Nikolai explains in broken English, gesturing at the ground. "Permafrost is like concrete, but also like enemy. It melts, it freezes, it moves. House must work with permafrost, not against." He takes you on a tour starting with the foundation, or rather the lack of foundation. The house sits on a gravel bed that provides insulation from the permafrost below. Beneath that gravel, the ground has been frozen solid for anywhere between 200 and 500,000 years. Scientists have drilled cores in this region that show permafrost extending down over 1,500 meters, deeper than the Empire State Building is tall. This ancient ice contains everything that's fallen onto it over millennia. Pollen, bones, entire frozen mammoths, and once, according to local legend, a perfectly preserved cave lion that a drunk geologist tried to adopt as a pet before wiser heads prevailed. The walls are constructed from larch logs, the only tree species tough enough to thrive in this climate. Larch is unusual among conifers because it's deciduous, dropping its needles in winter, which somehow makes it nearly immune to frost damage. The logs are chinked with moss, clay, and in some places what appears to be horse manure mixed with straw. "Good insulation," Nikolai says, patting the wall affectionately. "Horse shit keeps heat in, keeps cold out. Also, if you are hungry." He grins. "I am joking. We do not eat horse shit. Usually, the roof is where things get truly interesting. It's covered in layers of birch bark, earth, and sod, creating what's essentially a living roof, though living is generous given that it's frozen solid 8 months of the year. This layered approach creates dead air spaces that trap heat, the same principle used in modern insulated clothing, but achieved through materials your ancestors could gather from their immediate surroundings. Snow accumulates on top, adding another insulation layer. By midwinter, some houses are carrying several tons of snow on their roofs, which is fine as long as the structural timbers hold and you remember to check for ice dams. Inside, the house is divided into sections, with the warmest area being the kitchen, where a massive iron stove dominates one wall like a metal deity, demanding constant tribute of firewood. This stove is the heart of the house, literally, as it provides nearly all the heat, and figuratively, as it's where family life centers. "Stove must never go out in winter," Nikolai says seriously. "If stove goes out, house freezes in maybe 6 hours. Then everything breaks. Pipes, walls crack, food freezes. Then you must rebuild stove fire, But now house is cold, very hard to warm again. So we keep fire always. The stove itself is a marvel of thermal efficiency, designed to burn wood slowly and extract maximum heat. Smoke travels through internal channels before exiting, warming the stove's mass so it radiates heat for hours after the fire dies down. On top, there's always a pot of water simmering, adding moisture to air that would otherwise be drier than a desert. Dry air is dangerous, Nikolai explains. Your nose, your throat, they dry out, crack, bleed, then infection. So we keep water always boiling, always adding moisture. But here's the truly wild part about building in Yakutia. Construction itself is a battle against thermodynamics that would make physicists weep. You cannot pour concrete foundations because concrete requires water, and water freezes at temperatures you're experiencing roughly 9 months of the year. You cannot dig into the permafrost with normal tools because the ground is harder than most metals. Traditional builders used fire to thaw small sections of ground, let it soften, dig frantically, then repeat. A process so labor-intensive that constructing a small house could take an entire summer. Nikolai shows you the underground storage cellar, accessed through a trapdoor in the floor. You descend a ladder into a chamber carved into the permafrost itself, a space about 3 meters on each side, with walls of pure ice. The temperature here is a constant -10 degrees Celsius year-round, warm compared to the outside winter air, but still well below freezing. Carcasses hang from hooks. Entire reindeer, sections of horse, fish frozen into solid clubs. This is our freezer, Nikolai says. Better than electric. Never breaks. Never needs power. Meat stays good for years. Historians still argue whether the Saka learned ice cellar construction from indigenous groups already in the region or developed it independently, but the technology itself is ancient and brilliantly simple. By excavating into permafrost, you create a space that maintains below zero temperatures perpetually. Food doesn't just freeze, it enters a state of suspended animation where bacterial decay essentially stops. Archaeologists have found 40,000-year-old mammoth meat in permafrost that was still edible in the sense that it wouldn't immediately kill you, though the taste was apparently challenging. Back upstairs, Nikolai shows you the sleeping arrangements. There's one large communal sleeping area with a platform bed piled absurdly high with furs and blankets, reindeer hide, bear fur, something that might be wolf, and modern synthetic sleeping bags for good measure. In old times, whole family sleeps together in winter, he explains. Mother, father, children, grandparents, sometimes even favorite horse if it is very cold. He sees your expression. Horse in house is warm horse gives heat to people, and also horse does not freeze to death. In spring, you still have horse. Is good system. This isn't a joke. In the most extreme cold, Saka families genuinely would bring valuable animals inside, creating a living arrangement that was part family home, part barn, and entirely focused on collective survival. The animals' body heat contributed to warming the space, and keeping them alive meant preserving crucial resources. A frozen horse was meat for a few weeks. A living horse was transportation, breeding stock, and a future source of both meat and more horses. The calculus was simple even if the smell was not. The windows are tiny, barely the size of your hand, because every opening is a thermal liability. In traditional balgans, windows were sometimes made from ice, specifically large blocks of clear lake ice fitted into frames. Ice windows let in light while providing better insulation than glass, though they had the obvious drawback of melting when indoor temperatures rose above freezing, which admittedly wasn't often. Nikolai's house has modern double-paned glass, but he's covered most windows with additional wooden shutters. Light is luxury, he says. Heat is necessity. You spend the afternoon learning about the tools required to build in permafrost. Nikolai shows you axes with specially hardened steel. Normal axes shatter in extreme cold, the metal becoming brittle and fracturing on impact. The same goes for saws, hammers, and any other metal tool. Everything must be specially treated, and even then, tool failure is common. I break 3 saws last winter, Nikolai says cheerfully. Metal just, poof, splits in half. Very frustrating. He also explains the phenomenon of exploding trees, which you'd assumed was an exaggeration until he shows you photographic evidence. When temperatures drop below -50 degrees Celsius, the sap in living trees can freeze so rapidly that it expands, creating pressure that literally explodes the tree trunk from the inside, sending splinters flying and creating a gunshot-like crack that echoes through the forest. You hear this in deep winter, Nikolai says. Boom, boom, like forest is shooting at you. First time, very scary. After you get used to it, is just trees dying. As evening approaches, though evening is indistinguishable from afternoon in the perpetual darkness, Nikolai's wife, Sardana, returns from checking their horses. She's a compact, powerful woman with a face weathered by decades of this climate, and she regards you with the amused tolerance usually reserved for exotic but useless pets. Through Nikolai's translation, she explains that their horses are fine, having pawed through the snow to reach grass, and that one mare looks ready to foal, which will be interesting in January when temperatures typically hit their lowest. Sardana prepares dinner, more stroganina, boiled horse meat, and something called salamat, a traditional Saka dish made from butter, flour, and sour cream fried together into a heavy, calorie-dense mass that tastes like your arteries are clogging in real time, but which provides exactly the kind of sustained energy you need in extreme cold. You do not eat light salad in winter, Sardana says, her first words in English. You eat fat. Fat keeps you warm, keeps you alive. In summer, maybe we eat light. In winter, we eat like bears. After dinner, sitting around the stove as the wind howls outside and the temperature drops to minus 55 degrees Celsius, Nikolai tells you about the worst building disaster he's witnessed. A neighbor tried to construct a house using modern techniques from a Russian construction manual written for temperate climates. Concrete foundation, standard insulation, regular glass windows, everything by the book, just the wrong book. First winter, everything fails, Nikolai recalls. Foundation cracks, pipes freeze and burst, windows fog with ice on inside. Family has to abandon house, move in with relatives. House is still there, empty, falling apart. Is good lesson. Cannot fight Yakutia with normal thinking. Must respect cold, work with cold. As you settle into your pile of furs for the night, you understand something fundamental. Every aspect of shelter in Yakutia is a negotiation with extreme cold. The building techniques passed down through generations aren't quaint traditions. They're refined technologies developed through trial, error, and undoubtedly numerous deaths. The partially underground design, the tiny windows, the massive stove, the use of animal dung in walls, even the practice of bringing livestock inside, all of it represents generations of accumulated knowledge about surviving in conditions that should be unsurvivable. Outside, the temperature continues its nightly plunge toward minus 60 degrees Celsius. Inside, wrapped in enough furs to outfit a small zoo, you're almost comfortable, which in Yakutia counts as luxury. Tomorrow, Nikolai promises you'll learn about hunting, and about what happens when shelter isn't available and staying warm becomes a matter of improvisation, desperation, and occasionally the residual heat of something recently alive. You wake at what your phone insists is 8 a.m., though the darkness outside suggests otherwise. The temperature inside the house has dropped overnight to maybe 5 degrees Celsius. Positively tropical compared to the minus 58 degrees Celsius reading outside. You can see your breath, but you're not actively dying, which Sardana seems to consider evidence of successful hospitality. Nikolai is already up, feeding the stove with birch logs that crack and pop as they ignite, releasing a smell that's part wood smoke, part resin, and entirely comforting in a primal way your ancestors would recognize. Breakfast is leftover horse meat and tea strong enough to wake the dead, which is approximately how you feel. Today we check traps, Nikolai announces. Maybe we hunt. You will see how Saka find food when everything is hiding from cold. He hands you the reindeer hide coat Mikhail brought, and you spend 10 minutes wrestling yourself into it, feeling like you're being consumed by a very warm, very dead animal, which technically you are. The traps are located along a route that Nikolai covers every few days, a circuit through the forest and along the frozen river that stretches roughly 15 kilometers. You're traveling by snowmobile, a concession to modernity that Nikolai admits has made winter hunting much less miserable than when he was young. My father used skis or sometimes horses, he says. Take all day to check traps. Now few hours. But also snowmobile breaks in cold, needs fuel, needs parts. Skis never break, horses only sometimes die. Is trade-off. The forest in darkness is otherworldly. Your headlamp creates a tunnel of visibility through trees that are so frost-covered they look like they've been dipped in white chocolate. Every surface sparkles with ice crystals, and occasionally you pass through clouds of ice fog so thick it's like driving through a frozen dream. The snowmobile's engine sounds different in extreme cold, harsher, more labored, as if it too is questioning the wisdom of being operational at -58 degrees Celsius. The first trap is empty, just a metal contraption covered in frost, designed for sable or fox. The second holds a frozen sable, its lustrous fur the reason these animals were hunted nearly to extinction in the early Soviet period. Nikolai extracts it carefully, showing you how the trap works. A simple spring-loaded jaw mechanism that kills quickly. If animal suffers long time, fur is bad. Meat is full of stress chemicals, tastes wrong, he explains. Quick death is better for everyone. Animal, hunter, person who eats meat. By the third trap, you're starting to understand the mathematics of survival hunting. Not every trap succeeds. Many are empty. Some are triggered by wind or falling branches. But over a long enough circuit, with enough traps, you accumulate resources. One sable today, 2 foxes tomorrow, maybe a wolverine next week. It adds up to sustenance and trade goods. The Saka have been running traplines for centuries, developing an intuitive understanding of animal behavior that modern wildlife biologists confirm with their radiotelemetry and population models. Nikolai points out tracks in the snow, reading them like text. Hare, running from fox, maybe 2 days ago. Fox caught hare there, see blood. Fox ate hare. Then wolf scared fox away, ate rest. The story is written in disturbed snow, a few drops of frozen blood, and the scatter pattern of fur and tiny bones. In winter, everyone is hungry, Nikolai says. Animals hunt animals. We hunt animals. A circle, very old circle. The sun makes its brief cameo around 11 a.m., and you stop to watch, partly for the beauty, partly because Nikolai insists that seeing sunlight in winter is psychologically important, even if it's just a pale smear on the southern horizon. In old times, people go crazy in dark times, he says. Especially January, February, very dark, very cold, very long. People start to see things, hear things, start to believe spirits are real, are talking to them. Maybe spirits are real, I don't know. But also maybe brain needs sunlight like body needs food. This is something researchers have studied extensively. Seasonal affective disorder is common in polar regions, but in Yakutia it's compounded by the extreme cold that keeps people trapped indoors. The traditional Saka response was communal. Storytelling gatherings, shared meals, ritual celebrations that broke up the monotony of darkness and isolation. Modern Yakuts have added television, internet, and vitamin D supplements to the toolkit, but the winter psychology remains challenging. Suicide rates spike in late winter, and alcohol abuse remains a significant problem, particularly in rural areas where the isolation and darkness are most intense. After checking the trap line, Nikolai decides to hunt actively. There are horses nearby, wild or feral horses descended from domestic stock that escaped or were released. These aren't the Saka's own horses, which are carefully tracked and managed, but rather a free-roaming population that exists in a gray area between wildlife and livestock. We can hunt these, Nikolai explains. They are nobody's horses. Also, they eat grass our horses need. So hunting them is good for our herd. You set up in a position overlooking a valley where horses are known to dig for grass. The wait is long and intensely cold. Even wrapped in reindeer fur, even sitting on an insulated pad, the cold creeps in. It starts at your extremities, toes first, then fingers, then your nose and cheeks. You shift constantly, flex your muscles, try to generate heat, but you're losing the thermodynamic battle. An hour passes, then 2. You're beginning to understand why Saka hunters developed legendary patience. Not from some mystical connection to nature, but from the practical reality that if you give up and move around too much, you'll spook your prey and have nothing to show for your freezing. Finally, horses appear, 3 of them, stocky and shaggy, pawing through snow to reach the dried grass beneath. Nikolai waits, watching, his breathing slow and controlled. He's using a modern rifle, a bolt-action centerfire that's been modified for cold weather operation, with special lubricants that won't freeze. Old times, we use bow, he whispers. But in very cold, bowstring breaks, wood becomes brittle. Also, bow requires you to get very close. Rifle is better, especially when you are old like me. He takes his shot, the crack impossibly loud in the frozen air. The horse drops immediately, a clean kill. The other horses bolt, vanishing into the forest within seconds. Nikolai approaches carefully, confirming the animal is dead, then begins the process of field dressing it. This is where you learn something that all your research hadn't quite prepared you for. When you open an animal in -58 °C temperature, steam pours out. The horse's internal temperature was around 38 °C when it died, making the interior of its body roughly 96 degrees warmer than the ambient air. As Nikolai cuts through hide and muscle, vapor billows out like smoke from a chimney. The organs, heart, lungs, liver, intestines, are still generating heat from residual cellular respiration, creating a pocket of warmth that will persist for anywhere from 20 minutes to an hour depending on the animal's size. Put your hands here, Nikolai instructs, guiding your gloved hands toward the horse's abdominal cavity. Even through thick mittens, you can feel it, warmth, genuine warmth, the first you've felt in hours. This is old emergency trick, Nikolai explains as he works. If you are caught in storm, if you are lost and freezing, if you are going to die from cold, you kill animal if you can, and you use its heat. Open it up, put your hands in, maybe even crawl inside if animal is big enough. Can save your life. He's not being metaphorical. The practice of using freshly killed animals for emergency warmth is documented across Arctic cultures, from the Inuits' use of seal carcasses to the Saka's use of horses or reindeer. In the most extreme scenarios, caught in a blizzard far from shelter, hypothermia setting in, death approaching, a hunter would kill their horse or reindeer, gut it, and literally climb into the body cavity, using the carcass as a sleeping bag until the storm passed or rescue arrived. Historians still argue whether this was common practice or rare emergency measure, but the archaeological and ethnographic evidence is clear. It happened, and it worked. The German army learned this the hard way during the Soviet winter campaigns of World War II, when soldiers unfamiliar with extreme cold survival techniques froze to death next to dead horses they could have used for warmth. The Red Army, by contrast, included soldiers from Siberia who understood these techniques and survived conditions that killed their better-equipped but less adapted enemies. Nikolai works efficiently, removing organs, separating usable meat from hide and bone. Nothing is wasted. The hide will become leather or insulation. The bones will be boiled for marrow and stock. The organs will be eaten fresh or fed to dogs. The meat will be frozen and stored. He demonstrates how to remove the intestines without puncturing them, because gut bacteria in the meat is a serious problem. But he also shows you a technique that seems medieval. In an emergency, emptied intestines can be turned inside out, scraped clean, and used as water storage, or even worn as insulation under outer garments. In very old times, hunters sometimes wear intestines next to skin, Nikolai says, holding up a length of cleaned gut. Is warm, is waterproof, keeps wind out. Smells very bad, but when you are dying from cold, you do not care about smell. He grins. Modern Saka use Gore-Tex. Much better. But if I am in forest, alone, freezing, and my clothes are wet, I will use intestines. Survival is not about dignity, is about not dying. The butchering process takes over an hour, and by the end, despite the work, you're dangerously cold. Your fingers are numb even inside multiple layers of mittens. Your face is frozen where your balaclava has gaps. Nikolai notices and makes you press your hands back into the horse's still warm body cavity while he loads meat onto the snowmobile. The relief is immediate and profound. Heat, blessed heat, flowing back into your fingers. It's grotesque and beautiful simultaneously, this moment of warmth stolen from death. On the ride back, you think about the calculations of Arctic hunting. The energy expended in hunting must be less than the calories gained from the kill, or you're in a losing game. The risk of exposure must be balanced against the necessity of food. Every hunt is a negotiation with death, your potential death from cold, the animal's death for food, and the understanding that sometimes these roles can reverse. A hunter caught in a storm without shelter becomes a meal for wolves or ravens. The circle continues. Back at the house, Sardana oversees the distribution of meat. Portions go to 3 neighboring families, the gift economy in action. She keeps the liver and heart for immediate consumption, hangs the rest in the permafrost cellar. 1 horse feeds many people for long time, she says. But also, we share because next time, maybe we are the ones who need help. Maybe our hunt fails, maybe our horses die. Then our neighbors share with us. This is how we survive, together, not alone. That night, you eat horse heart sliced thin and served with salt. Another traditional dish that's packed with iron and vitamins crucial for surviving winter. It's tough and metallic tasting, but after a day in minus 58 degrees Celsius cold, it's ambrosial. Your body is screaming for calories, for fat, for protein, and every bite feels like it's being immediately converted into heat and energy. Nikolai tells stories of hunting trips gone wrong. The time his grandfather got caught in a storm and survived 3 days in a snow cave. The time his uncle's rifle froze solid and he had to kill a wolverine with a knife. The time he himself fell through river ice and had to run 6 kilometers back to the village before hypothermia killed him, arriving with his clothes frozen solid and his skin already showing signs of frostbite. Yakutia is beautiful, Nikolai says, staring into the stove's flames, but is also always trying to kill you. Every day, every winter is test. You respect cold, you prepare, you use knowledge from ancestors, you maybe survive. You get careless, you get unlucky, you make one mistake, cold wins. Cold always wins eventually, but we try to delay that as long as possible. Outside, the temperature has dropped to minus 61 degrees Celsius, a reading that would make international news anywhere else, but which here is just a cold night. Inside, wrapped in furs near the stove, you're warm and fed and alive, which is all any organism can ask for. Tomorrow, Nikolai promises you'll learn more about the extreme measures, the desperate techniques used when everything else fails and warmth becomes a matter of life and death measured in minutes. Morning arrives with Nikolai shaking you awake, excitement evident in his voice despite the ungodly hour. Storm coming, he announces. Big one. We must prepare, and also good chance to show you real survival. Not comfortable survival with house and stove, but emergency survival when you have nothing. You peer out the tiny window at what looks like the same darkness you've seen every other morning. But Nikolai insists he can smell it in the air, feel it in the pressure. By tonight, maybe tomorrow, temperature drops more, wind comes. This is when people die if they are not ready. The preparation is methodical and revealing. Nikolai packs an emergency bag that lives by the door year-round. Waterproof matches in multiple containers, a knife that could double as a small machete, a compact saw, rope, a space blanket, modern edition, strips of dried meat, and curiously, a small jar of rendered animal fat. This fat is everything, he explains. Can eat it for energy, can burn it for light, can rub on skin to prevent frostbite, can use to waterproof things. Fat is life. He also shows you his emergency kill kit, tools specifically designed for the scenario you've been dancing around. A specialized knife for field dressing in extreme cold, heavy-duty plastic bags that won't crack at low temperatures, and most tellingly, what looks like a child's sleeping bag made from some kind of hide. This is gutting bag, Nikolai says matter-of-factly. If I must use animal carcass for warmth, I crawl into this first, then into animal. Keeps blood and fluids off my clothes, because wet clothes in cold kill you very fast. You spend the afternoon in what Nikolai calls exposure training, which turns out to be a polite term for intentionally suffering to learn your limits. He takes you outside in progressively fewer layers, timing how long before numbness sets in, before motor control degrades, before clear thinking becomes difficult. At minus 62 degrees Celsius, these stages arrive with terrifying speed. 7 minutes in just your base layers and you're already shaking uncontrollably, your fingers refusing to operate the zipper to let yourself back inside. This is why you must know your body, Nikolai explains once you're back inside, thawing painfully by the stove. You must know, I have 10 minutes before I cannot use my hands. I have 30 minutes before I cannot think clear. I have maybe 2 hours before I die. When you know this, you can make plans that work. You know how fast you must build fire or find shelter, or yes, kill animal for warmth. He tells you the story, he swears it's true, though you suspect some embellishment, of his great-uncle Dmitri, who got separated from his hunting party in a January blizzard back in the 1950s. Dmitri had his rifle, his knife, and was riding a horse when visibility dropped to 0. He made the calculation quickly. His horse knew the way home better than he did, but in a whiteout, even the horse would become disoriented. Staying on the horse and waiting out the storm meant both of them would freeze. The horse might survive if Dmitri sacrificed himself to keep moving, maintain circulation. But Dmitri wanted to live. So my uncle, he shoots his horse, Nikolai says. Not easy thing. This horse has carried him for 5 years. This horse is like family. But storm is bad, cold is very bad, and he knows if he waits, he will be too frozen to do what must be done. Dmitri field-dressed the horse in the howling wind, working by feel as much as by sight. His hands already going numb despite heavy gloves. He removed the entrails, creating a cavity in the carcass, and then, this is the part that makes your stomach turn, he stripped off his outer layers, crawled into the gutting bag, and then crawled into the horse's body cavity. He stays inside dead horse for 2 days, Nikolai continues. Storm is very bad. Wind, snow, cold, maybe -65, maybe -70. Outside the horse, he dies in 1 hour. Inside, surrounded by meat and fat and hide, he stays warm enough to survive. Not comfortable. He said it was worst 2 days of his life, smell was terrible, was cramped and dark and disgusting. But he lived. When storm cleared, he cut meat from horse, used hide to wrap himself, walked home. Took 3 days. Arrived with severe frostbite on his feet, lost 3 toes. But alive. You want to dismiss this as folklore, but Nikolai shows you a photograph, faded, from the 1960s maybe, showing an older man with a haunted expression holding up what's unmistakably a horse hide with a human-sized opening cut into it. That is Uncle Dmitri, Nikolai says. That is his survival hide. He kept it until he died. Said it reminded him that he was tougher than cold, tougher than storm. This practice, using large mammal carcasses as emergency shelters, has been documented across cultures living in extreme cold. The most famous Western example is probably Han Solo stuffing Luke Skywalker into a tauntaun in The Empire Strikes Back, which, despite being science fiction, is based on real survival techniques that George Lucas's researchers found while studying Arctic survival. The principle is sound. A large animal's carcass retains heat for hours, provides insulation from wind, and in the most extreme interpretation, can be entered to create a microclimate warm enough to prevent death by hypothermia. But there's a brutal calculus involved. You must be desperate enough to kill your means of transportation, your horse or reindeer, which means accepting that you're now on foot in hostile terrain. You must overcome the psychological horror of crawling into a dead animal's body cavity, surrounded by organs and fluids, essentially wearing death to avoid death. You must do all of this while hypothermic, while your fine motor control is degrading, while your ability to make rational decisions is impaired by cold. Not everyone can do this, Nikolai admits. Some people, they freeze to death next to their horse because they cannot make themselves kill it, or they kill it but cannot make themselves crawl inside. It's too disgusting, too horrible. They die with dignity, but they still die. Saka who survive are ones who say, dignity is for summer. Winter is for living. He shows you the more common, less extreme application of the principle, using freshly killed animals for targeted warming. If your hands are becoming frostbitten, you gut a fresh kill and plunge your hands into the warmth of its abdominal cavity, using those precious minutes of residual heat to restore circulation. If your feet are freezing, you can remove the animal's hide and wrap your feet in it while it's still warm and supple. These are temporary measures, buying time until you can reach real shelter or build a fire. But in an environment where you can go from uncomfortable to dead in under an hour, buying time means buying life. Sardana joins the conversation, adding her own perspective. Women also know these techniques, she says. Maybe we do not hunt as much, but we travel between villages, we gather wood, we check animals. I have used warm carcass for my hands twice. Once a fox I trapped, once a reindeer that broke its leg and I had to kill it. Both times, my hands were so cold I could not feel them, could not use them. Put them inside warm animal for maybe 5 minutes. Feeling comes back. Small thing, but important thing. She also mentions something you hadn't considered. Using animals for warmth isn't always about fresh kills. In extreme cold, Saka herders sometimes sleep among their living animals, using the herd's collective body heat to survive nights that would otherwise kill them. My grandmother, she tells stories about staying with horse herd in winter storm, Sardana says. 30, 40 horses huddle together. She and her sister huddle in middle. Horses make circle, protect people from wind. Everyone survives. Without horses, the girls freeze. This is why we treat horses with respect. They save our lives many times. The storm arrives after dark, though dark is redundant in winter Yakutia. What changes is the wind. It goes from the usual eerie stillness to a screaming fury that makes the house creak and shudder. Snow doesn't fall so much as blast horizontally, driven by winds that Nikolai estimates are hitting 80 kilometers per hour. The temperature paradoxically rises to minus 45 degrees Celsius because the storm is pulling in slightly warmer air from the south. But the wind chill makes it feel far, far colder. In this weather, exposed skin freezes in under 2 minutes. Nikolai shouts over the wind's roar. If you are outside without shelter, you have maybe 30 minutes before you cannot think straight, 1 hour before you die. This is when all the emergency techniques matter. He's clearly energized by the storm, the way some people are energized by challenges. This is his element, his test, his opportunity to prove the value of traditional knowledge against nature's assault. He takes you to the window, or rather, to where the window would be visible if it wasn't completely obscured by snow and ice. People have died 10 meters from their own house in storms like this, he says. Cannot see anything, lose direction, wander in circles. We find them in spring, frozen, sometimes with hands stretched out toward house they could not find. It's a sobering thought, that shelter, warmth, and safety can be close enough to touch but impossible to reach when visibility drops to zero and cold steals your ability to function. The evening meal is heavy on fat again. Sardana serves thick slices of frozen horse fat that you're supposed to eat raw, letting them melt slowly in your mouth. It tastes exactly like eating cold animal fat, which is to say, not great, but your body responds to it with enthusiasm, recognizing the dense calories as exactly what it needs. In bad storms, we eat fat all day, Sardana explains. Keeps internal fire burning. Body makes heat from fat better than from anything else. Nikolai brings out a collection of items from a storage chest, laying them out like artifacts in a museum. There's a set of clothing made entirely from intestines, sewn together to create a waterproof overlayer that, while translucent and deeply unsettling to look at, would be genuinely functional in wet conditions. There's a pair of boots with the fur turned inward and what appears to be grass stuffed between layers for insulation. There's a hat made from an entire fox, head and all, arranged so the fox's face sits above yours like some kind of fur guardian. These are old ways, Nikolai says, handling each item with reverence. Before we could buy modern clothes, before we had synthetic materials. Everything made from animals, every part of animal used. Nothing wasted because waste meant maybe you die next winter when you need that thing you threw away. He holds up a pair of mittens made from reindeer leg skin, fur inward, with the hooves still attached. These mittens, they ugly, yes, but warmer than anything you can buy in city. Reindeer leg fur is special. Hollow hairs, trap air, provide insulation like nothing else. He lets you try them on. They're simultaneously crude and sophisticated, clearly handmade but engineered with an understanding of thermodynamics that would impress a modern materials scientist. Your hands, which had been cold despite being inside, warm up immediately. See, Nikolai grins. Reindeer spend whole life in cold worse than this. Evolution makes their fur perfect for cold. We just borrow that perfection. As the storm intensifies outside and the house creaks under the assault, you think about the layers of survival knowledge embedded in everything around you. The house design that works with permafrost instead of against it. The stove that never goes out. The food storage system that's just outside. The clothing made from animals that evolved for this climate. And yes, the emergency techniques that involve getting uncomfortably intimate with dead animals because the alternative is joining them in death. Tomorrow, if storm clears, we practice emergency shelter building. Nikolai promises. You will learn to dig snow cave, to build windbreak, to make fire in impossible conditions. And yes, I will show you proper technique for emergency animal warmth use. Just demonstration, not real emergency. We will use old carcass from freezer, not kill fresh animal. But you will understand how it works, how it feels, why people do this thing that seems crazy but is actually just science of staying alive. Outside, the storm howls like something alive and angry. Wind speeds probably exceeding 100 kilometers per hour now. Temperature with wind chill somewhere around minus 80 degrees Celsius or colder. In these conditions, exposed flesh freezes solid in under 60 seconds. Death comes in minutes. But inside, you're warm and fed and learning, surrounded by 1,000 years of accumulated survival knowledge that treats nature not as an enemy to be conquered but as a force to be respected, understood, and occasionally, in the most desperate moments, cannibalized for its warmth before it cannibalizes you for your nutrients. The fact that humans not only survive here but have built a culture, raised families, and lived lives that include joy in art and music. It's either the most inspiring or most insane thing you've ever encountered, possibly both. The storm clears by morning, leaving behind a transformed landscape. Snow has drifted against the house to a depth of nearly 2 meters, and the sky, visible for the first time in days, is that peculiar crystalline blue that only appears in extreme cold, so clear and sharp it almost hurts to look at. The temperature has plummeted back to minus 67 degrees Celsius, which Nikolai announces with the satisfaction of a weatherman who's been proven right. This is real Yakutia winter, he says. This is the cold that makes us who we are. After breakfast, horse meat and that thick tea that's more concept than beverage, Nikolai leads you to the permafrost cellar. He's brought up a reindeer carcass, killed and frozen 2 months ago, now solid as stone. This is for demonstration, he explains. Real emergency, you use fresh kill, still warm. But for learning, frozen animal works to show technique. He lays it on a tarp outside, and even frozen solid, it's an impressive sight. A full-grown reindeer, maybe 90 kilograms, preserved in what looks like suspended animation. First, understand the science. Nikolai begins, sounding like a professor delivering a lecture, if professors wore fox fur hats and had frostbitten noses. Warm-blooded animal maintains internal temperature around 39 degrees Celsius. When you kill animal, this heat does not disappear immediately. Heart stops, breathing stops, but cells still have energy, still produce heat for maybe 30 minutes, maybe 1 hour depending on animal size. Larger animal, more heat. Heat lasts longer. He points to the reindeer's abdomen. This area, stomach, intestines, liver, kidneys. This is where most heat is. Organs are working hardest, have most blood, produce most warmth. So in emergency, this is where you go. You open animal here, remove or push aside organs, create space for your body. He mimes the cutting motion, and you're grateful this is frozen demonstration and not the real thing. But timing is everything, he continues. You must work fast because you are already cold, already losing coordination. An animal is losing heat every second. If you take too long to field dress, by time you crawl inside, animal is cold too and you get nothing. So technique must be efficient, practiced. This is why we teach young people these things. So if emergency comes, hands know what to do even when brain is frozen and confused. He walks you through the theoretical process step by step. First, position the animal on its back. Second, make the initial cut from sternum to pelvis, being careful not to puncture intestines. Even in an emergency, you don't want gut bacteria contaminating everything. Third, remove or displace the organs to create a cavity. Fourth, and this is the part that still makes you queasy, enter the cavity feet first if possible, drawing the animal's hide around you like a gruesome sleeping bag. In Uncle Dimitri's case with horse, he had enough space to curl up almost completely inside. Nikolai says, horse is bigger than reindeer, more room. But even with reindeer, you can get your core, your torso inside, protect your vital organs from wind and cold. Your legs might stick out, but you can wrap them with hide with your extra clothing. Main thing is keeping your core warm, keeping your brain from freezing. Sardana joins you outside. Bundled in so many layers, she waddles rather than walks. She carries a bag of equipment and what looks disturbingly like enthusiasm for this morbid lesson. This is not just men's knowledge, she says. Women must know too. Maybe more important for women because we are often traveling with children. And if emergency comes, we must know how to save children's lives. She demonstrates what she calls the double wrap technique. If you have a child with you in an emergency, you can gut an animal, put the child inside the carcass wrapped in the gutting bag, then wrap yourself around the outside using the animal's hide as a shared shelter. Is not perfect, Sardana admits, but is better than both of you freezing. Animals' residual heat plus your body heat plus child's body heat, all trapped together, can mean difference between life and death. The demonstration continues with Nikolai showing you various animal sizes and the different strategies for each. A fox or Arctic hare, too small to provide cavity shelter, but you can skin it immediately and wear the hide against your torso, using body heat to keep it supple while it provides extra insulation. A reindeer or large deer, sufficient size for torso immersion, can save your life if you work quickly. A horse or moose, large enough that an adult could potentially fit entirely inside, though the logistics become challenging and the psychological horror intensifies. There is also the living animal technique, Nikolai adds, and this surprises you. If you are with your horse or reindeer in storm, and you think maybe you will freeze, you can use living animal for warmth without killing it. Press yourself against its belly, under its chest where fur is thickest. Some herders carry blanket that goes over both person and animal, creating shared warm space. Animal does not like this, but animal also does not like freezing, so usually tolerates it. He tells you about a technique used by some Saka and Evenk herders called reindeer bundling. In extreme storms, herders would position themselves in the center of a reindeer herd, letting the animals create a living windbreak. The combined body heat of dozens of reindeer could raise the temperature in the herd center by 20 or 30 degrees compared to the surrounding air. Of course, you must trust reindeer not to panic and stampede over you, Nikolai notes. But reindeer are usually calm animals, and they understand storm is dangerous for them too, so usually works well. The conversation shifts to food preservation, which in Yakutia is less a technology and more a default state of existence. Everything outside is frozen solid from October through April, creating a natural freezer that never breaks, never needs electricity, and maintains perfect storage conditions for months. The permafrost cellar Nikolai showed you extends this to year-round storage, with some families keeping meat frozen for years. My great-grandmother, she had meat in permafrost cellar from 1950s that we ate in 1980s, Sardana says. 30 years frozen, still good. No freezer burn, no decay, just frozen meat waiting to be eaten. Some scientists came from Moscow, asked to study it, said meat was perfectly preserved, would be safe to eat even after 100 years frozen. She shows you the cellar's inventory, a handwritten ledger that tracks what's stored where. There are entries dating back to 2018, 2015, 2010, marking sides of horse, reindeer haunches, fish by the dozen. We take from bottom, oldest first, she explains. Add to top, newest. This way, nothing goes to waste. In bad year when hunting is poor, we have reserve. Can survive on old meat if necessary. The cellar itself is a marvel of natural preservation. The temperature hovers around -10 degrees Celsius year-round, cold enough to keep everything frozen but not so cold that it degrades the meat's texture. The permafrost walls provide natural humidity control, preventing the desiccation that plagues electric freezers. And because the cold is constant and stable, there's no freeze-thaw cycle to damage cellular structure. Sometimes we make stroganina from very old fish, Sardana continues. Fish frozen for 5-10 years. You would think it is bad, but no is exactly same as fresh frozen fish. Ice is perfect preserver. Before we had permafrost cellars, people would bury meat in snow, mark the spot, return in spring when they needed it. In old stories, hunters would cache meat after successful hunt, bury it deep in permafrost, come back years later and find it still good. Nikolai produces a scientific paper. He's surprisingly well-read for someone who lives in what you'd initially assumed was isolated subsistence territory, about permafrost preservation. Researchers have found mammoth meat that's technically still edible after 40,000 years frozen. The cells are destroyed by ice crystal formation, so the texture is ruined, but the proteins and fats are still intact, still nutritious in a purely caloric sense. This is why we never worry about food spoiling in winter, Nikolai says. Cold kills nothing, preserves everything. Is only in summer we must worry about meat going bad. This creates an interesting culinary culture. Because meat is always available frozen, Saka cuisine developed around frozen preparation methods. Stroganina, those paper-thin slices of frozen fish or meat, isn't just a novelty dish but a fundamental food preparation technique that requires no cooking, no thawing, just sharp knives and practice. The meat is eaten while still frozen, allowed to thaw slightly in your mouth, providing both nutrition and hydration since frozen meat contains ice crystals. You notice we eat a lot of frozen food? Sardana asks. This is not because we are lazy or because we like it better frozen. It's because thawing and cooking requires fuel, requires wood or gas. In deep winter, when it is very cold, sometimes it's more efficient to eat food frozen than to spend fuel thawing and cooking. Body will warm the food inside you. Use your internal heat instead of external fire. She demonstrates the proper way to eat stroganina. Take a small piece, let it sit on your tongue. Allow your mouth's warmth to gradually thaw it while you breathe carefully to avoid freezing your palate. If you try to chew immediately, you can damage teeth on frozen meat. If you swallow without thawing, can damage throat, stomach. So you must be patient. Let body warm food slowly. It's a strange inversion of normal eating. Usually you cool hot food to eat it safely. Here you must warm frozen food for the same reason. The lunch is, predictably, more frozen meat, horse this time, cut into cubes and served with frozen berries that crunch like gravel but taste surprisingly sweet. Nikolai also brings out a jar of fermented mare's milk called kumis, which has the consistency of thin yogurt and tastes like sour horse, because that's essentially what it is. Traditional Saka drink, he says. Probiotics, vitamins, alcohol content. In old times was very important for health, especially in winter when fresh food was impossible. Historians still argue whether the Saka developed kumis independently or brought the technique with them from Central Asia, where similar fermented milk drinks are common among Turkic peoples. The drinking of kumis is one of the strongest cultural connections between modern Saka and their Central Asian origins. A liquid linked to ancestors who lived somewhere warm enough that milk didn't freeze instantly when extracted from the animal. After lunch, Nikolai takes you to his outdoor freezer, which is just outside, specifically a wooden platform raised on poles where meat hangs in the open air. Several horse carcasses dangle from hooks, frozen solid, their surfaces covered in frost crystals that catch the brief afternoon sunlight and sparkle like they've been dipped in diamonds. Ravens circle overhead, waiting for an opportunity, but Nikolai's dog, a hulking thing that's part husky, part wolf, part prehistoric nightmare, keeps them at bay. In city, people have electric freezer, pay for electricity every month, worry about power outage, Nikolai muses. Here we have world's largest freezer, costs nothing, never breaks. Only problem is bears in summer, but in winter even bears are sleeping. So is perfect. He pats one of the frozen horses affectionately, the sound like slapping concrete. This horse we butcher when needed, can last family 6 months, maybe more. One good hunt feeds us through winter. As the temperature drops with the approaching evening, down to minus 69 degrees Celsius now, a reading that still doesn't feel quite real. You help bring in wood for the stove, a process that's both necessary and meditative. Each log must be checked for frost damage, for cracks that indicate the tree exploded from internal ice formation. Good wood burns clean and hot. Damaged wood burns poorly and produces creosote that can clog the chimney and cause fires. Sardana is preparing dinner, a stew this time, with chunks of frozen horse meat thrown directly into boiling water. No thawing required. Frozen to boiling in one step, she says. Very efficient. Meat thaws in pot, cooks immediately, loses no quality. She also adds frozen wild onions and some kind of root vegetable that Nikolai identifies as lily tuber, dug from permafrost where they've been naturally stored since autumn. As you sit down to eat, watching the steam rise from your bowl and immediately crystallize in the cold air near the window, you realize that everything about Yakutian food culture makes perfect sense in context. Why thaw meat when cold is the default state? Why cook everything when eating frozen is viable? Why worry about preservation when the entire environment is a preservation system? The techniques that seemed strange or even barbaric when described academically now reveal themselves as elegant solutions to extreme environmental constraints. Tomorrow, Nikolai announces through a mouthful of stew. Tomorrow we go further. We test your limits. We simulate real emergency. See if you could survive alone in cold with only knife and knowledge. Will be interesting. He grins, and you're not sure if you should be excited or terrified. Probably both. You wake to what feels like a premonition of doom, though it's probably just the sound of Nikolai dragging equipment across the floor at an hour that shouldn't exist. Your phone reads 6 a.m., but phones are optimists. In Yakutian winter, 6 a.m. is indistinguishable from midnight, from 3 p.m., from any other hour swallowed by the polar night. Today is simulation day, Nikolai announces with the enthusiasm of someone about to watch another person suffer for educational purposes. You will learn what happens when everything goes wrong. The plan, as Nikolai outlines it over tea that could strip rust, is disturbingly simple. You'll be taken 5 kilometers from the house, given minimal equipment, knife, matches, rope, the clothes you're wearing, and told to survive until Nikolai comes to retrieve you in approximately 8 hours. The temperature is currently minus 68 degrees Celsius with no wind, which Nikolai describes as perfect conditions, with a definition of perfect that clearly differs from yours. This is how we teach young people, he explains. Not by talking, but by doing. You will be cold. You will be scared. You will think maybe you die. But I will be watching from distance, and if you actually start to die, I will come help. Probably. The probably doesn't fill you with confidence. But you're here to learn, and apparently learning requires suffering. Sardana packs you food, frozen meat, some dried berries, a chunk of that rendered fat Nikolai showed you earlier, and makes you promise to actually try to survive rather than just waiting to be rescued. Many people fail first time not because they cannot survive, but because they do not try, she says. They sit down, wait for help, and cold wins. You must fight, must keep moving, keep thinking, keep body and brain working. The ride to your drop-off point is conducted in silence, partly because conversation is difficult when bundled in enough fur to outfit a taxidermy convention, partly because you're genuinely anxious. Nikolai has mentioned that people die in situations like this, not often, but enough that it's a real risk rather than an abstract possibility. You're signing a metaphorical waiver by agreeing to this, trusting that his judgment about your abilities and his ability to rescue you are both accurate. He stops the snowmobile in a clearing surrounded by skeletal larch trees, all of them bent slightly in the same direction from prevailing winds, their branches frosted white. Okay, this is your spot, Nikolai says. I take snowmobile and equipment. You have knife, matches, rope, some food. You have 8 hours to make shelter, make fire, stay alive. I will be checking from distance, but you will not see me. Try to survive like you are really alone. And then he leaves. The snowmobile's engine fades into the distance, and you're standing alone in minus 68 degrees Celsius darkness with nothing but the weak beam of your headlamp and a growing sense that you've made terrible life choices. The silence is absolute. Not the quiet of a library or the hush of snowfall, but the complete absence of sound that comes when it's too cold for wind, too cold for animals, too cold for anything to move or live or make noise. Your first priority, you remember from Nikolai's lectures, is shelter. Fire is important, but shelter comes first because shelter blocks wind, traps heat, and provides psychological security. You scan the area with your headlamp and spot a small depression in the terrain, partially sheltered by a fallen tree. Not ideal, but workable. You start digging into the snow with your gloved hands, creating what Nikolai called a quinzee, basically a hollowed-out snow pile that uses the snow itself as insulation. The work is exhausting and counterintuitive. You're surrounded by cold, and your solution is to dig deeper into that cold. But the science is sound. Snow is actually an excellent insulator when properly structured. Each snowflake is a tiny crystal with air pockets, and air is one of the best insulators available. A properly built snow shelter can maintain internal temperatures 20 or 30 degrees warmer than the outside air, which at minus 68 degrees Celsius means the difference between agonizingly cold and merely miserably cold. You pile snow, pack it down, let it sinter. That's the technical term for when snow crystals bond together under pressure, creating a stronger structure. Then you dig into the pile from the side, creating a small cave just large enough for your body. The entrance should be lower than the sleeping platform, Nikolai taught you, so cold air sinks out while warm air rises and stays trapped inside. You carve a small ventilation hole in the roof because apparently you can suffocate in a sealed snow cave when your breath uses up the oxygen, which is a darkly ironic way to die when surrounded by frozen atmosphere. The shelter takes 2 hours to build, and by the time you're finished, you're sweating inside your layers, which is dangerous. Wet clothing in extreme cold loses its insulating properties and can kill you. You have to strip off one layer, let it freeze dry in the open air, then put it back on once your body temperature drops from the exertion. This feels insane, taking off clothes when you're already cold. But it works. The moisture freezes out of the fabric, leaving it dry and functional again. Next, fire. You gather dead wood, which fortunately is everywhere. The cold preserves fallen branches indefinitely, leaving a landscape littered with fuel. But here's the problem that theory doesn't quite prepare you for. Everything is frozen. The wood is frozen. Your matches are cold and don't strike well. Your fingers are cold and don't work well. And you need to create a structure that will burn hot enough, fast enough, to overcome the thermal mass of frozen wood that's currently at minus 68 degrees Celsius and really doesn't want to combust. You build a small platform of thicker logs to keep your tinder off the snow, then create a teepee structure of progressively larger sticks. The tinder is the hardest part. Nikolai showed you how to use birch bark, which contains oils that burn even when wet or frozen, but collecting it requires finding birch trees in the darkness, scraping bark with numb fingers, and hoping you gather enough before hypothermia makes the task impossible. The first match fails. Your fingers fumble it, and it falls into the snow, extinguished instantly. The second match lights but won't catch the tinder. The bark is too cold, and your breath, meant to encourage the flame, just blows it out. The third match, you only have 10 finally takes. A tiny flame licks at the birch bark, which begins to curl and blacken and reluctantly ignite. You feed it carefully, adding progressively larger pieces, watching it grow from ember to flame to actual fire. The relief is profound and immediate. The fire provides light, heat, and psychological comfort that's hard to overstate. You're not alone anymore. You have a companion, a tool, a weapon against the cold. You position yourself close, letting the heat thaw your face, your hands, your core. The temperature difference is extreme. One side facing the fire feels almost hot, while your backside is still freezing. You rotate like a rotisserie chicken, trying to distribute warmth evenly. But maintaining a fire in minus 68 degrees Celsius is its own challenge. The cold sucks heat away so efficiently that you need a constant, roaring fire just to maintain a small warm zone. Wood burns faster in extreme cold because the thermal gradient is so steep. The fire is desperately trying to heat frozen air and losing the battle. You find yourself feeding the fire constantly, gathering more wood, building up a reserve, understanding viscerally why traditional Yakut homes kept fires burning continuously. Letting a fire die in this cold meant hours of difficult, dangerous work to restart it. Around hour 4, you make the mistake of taking off your mittens to adjust something in the fire. Within 30 seconds, your fingers are numb. Within a minute, they're in genuine danger. You shove them into your armpits, the warmest part of your body, and wait for painful, prickling sensation of returning circulation. The experience is terrifying in its speed. You went from fine to frostbitten in under 60 seconds. This is the reality Nikolai has been trying to teach you. In extreme cold, mistakes compound quickly, and the window between error and injury is measured in seconds. You retreat to your snow shelter, bringing fire-heated rocks with you, another technique Nikolai demonstrated. Wrap the hot rocks in cloth, place them near your core, and they'll radiate heat for hours. This primitive central heating, and it works. Inside the shelter with the rocks and your body heat, the temperature is probably around minus 30 degrees Celsius, which feels tropical compared to outside. You could survive here, you realize. It wouldn't be comfortable, but you could live. The psychological aspect starts to hit around hour 5. The darkness is oppressive, absolute, unrelenting. Your fire creates a small bubble of light, but beyond it is void, Not just absence of light, but absence of everything. No sounds, no movement, no indication that anything exists beyond your tiny sphere of warmth and visibility. Historians still argue whether isolation or cold is the bigger killer in Arctic environments, but sitting here, you understand how they work in tandem. The isolation makes you doubt yourself, makes you question whether you're doing things correctly, makes you vulnerable to panic. And panic in extreme cold is a death sentence. You force yourself to stay busy. You improve your shelter, gather more wood, eat some of the frozen meat Sardana packed. It tastes exactly like frozen horse. Because it is frozen horse, but your body craves the calories. You melt snow for water, which requires more fuel and time than you anticipated. Snow has low thermal mass, so most of the heat energy goes into warming the container rather than melting the snow. It takes 20 minutes to produce 1 cup of drinkable water. Around hour 6, you hear something. A crack, distant but distinct. Then another. The exploding trees Nikolai mentioned, their sap freezing and expanding until the wood can't contain the pressure. Each crack sounds like a rifle shot, echoing through the frozen forest, and each one makes you flinch. In old times, these sounds must have terrified people, made them believe the forest was under attack or haunted. Now you know it's just thermodynamics being violent, but it's still unnerving. You think about Uncle Dmitri in his dead horse, and the thought doesn't seem as horrific as it did yesterday. If your fire went out, if you couldn't restart it, if hypothermia began to set in, yes, you would absolutely gut an animal and crawl inside if it meant surviving. The instinct for survival, you're learning, overrides squeamishness once death becomes immediate rather than abstract. Dignity is negotiable. Existence is not. Around hour 7, you're managing. You've achieved a routine. Feed fire, check shelter, rotate to warm all sides, eat a little, melt some snow, repeat. Your body has stopped shivering constantly and settled into a sort of resigned accommodation with the cold. You're not comfortable, but you're not dying, which is the goal. Nikolai appears at hour 8 exactly, emerging from the darkness like a yeti with better fashion sense. Good, he says, examining your shelter and fire. You survive. Many people fail first time, they panic, they waste matches, they build bad shelter. You do okay. Coming from Nikolai, this is effusive praise. The ride back is quiet, but you feel different. You faced the cold alone and won, or at least didn't lose. You built shelter, made fire, kept yourself alive through 8 hours of conditions that would kill an unprepared person. The knowledge is empowering and humbling simultaneously. Empowering because you now know you can survive, humbling because you also know how thin the margin was, how easily things could have gone wrong. Back at the house, Sardana has prepared a feast, hot stew, fresh bread, tea so strong it's probably illegal. You eat like someone who's been starving, which technically you have been, burning calories at an extreme rate to maintain body temperature. You understand now, Sardana says, not a question. You understand why we live the way we live, why we know the things we know. Is not tradition for tradition's sake. Is survival knowledge, tested over 1,000 years, refined by people who died when they got it wrong. That night, wrapped in furs and feeling the stove's warmth, you dream of fire and ice, of dead horses and living forests, of the 1,000 small decisions that separate life from death when temperature and biology are negotiating your continued existence. You dream of ancestors doing this every winter, every night, for centuries, building fires, huddling for warmth, surviving because giving up meant dying and dying meant your children died and your culture died. The stubbornness of survival, the refusal to quit even when quitting would be easier, the insistence on continuing to exist in a place that doesn't want you. It's inspiring and slightly insane, which describes most of human achievement if you're being honest. Tomorrow, Nikolai has promised you'll visit modern Yakutsk, see how ancient survival knowledge coexists with smartphones and satellite internet. But tonight, you sleep the sleep of someone who's earned it, your body warm, your belly full, your respect for extreme cold survival permanently, irrevocably established. The drive back to Yakutsk takes most of the day, partly because of the distance, partly because driving on ice roads at minus 65 degrees Celsius requires the kind of caution usually reserved for defusing bombs. You watch the landscape slide by, endless white punctuated by skeletal forests, the occasional abandoned building slowly being consumed by ice, and once, a herd of wild horses pawing through snow, their breath creating small clouds that freeze and fall like crystalline rain. They don't even look up as you pass. In Yakutia, survival requires ignoring distractions, even curious ones. Yakutsk appears gradually, a glow on the horizon that resolves into the ice fog you remember from your arrival, then into the stilted buildings and infrastructure of Russia's coldest major city. With a population hovering around 350,000, Yakutsk is a monument to human stubbornness, a modern city functioning in conditions that should make modern civilization impossible. As Nikolai drives through the outskirts, you see the contradictions everywhere. A woman in traditional reindeer fur clothing checking her iPhone, apartment blocks with satellite dishes encrusted in frost, a billboard advertising tropical beach vacations to people who won't see temperatures above zero for another 4 months. "Welcome to New Yakutia," Nikolai says with a hint of irony. "Where we have everything modern city has. Restaurants, universities, shopping malls, internet, but also everything still trying to kill you." He points to a bus stop where several people huddle, and you notice the structure is partially enclosed with heated benches. Even bus stop must be engineered for cold. Normal bus stop, people freeze while waiting. So we build special ones with heat with thick walls. Everything must be special here. Your first stop is a modern apartment complex. Visiting Nikolai's nephew Sergei, who works as an engineer for the city's heating infrastructure. Sergei is in his 30s, university educated, fluent in English, and represents the generation that's bridging traditional Yakut knowledge with modern technology. His apartment is warm, almost hot by your recalibrated standards, with triple-paned windows and a heating system that pumps hot water through radiators even in the coldest winter. Our heating system is actually one of the city's greatest engineering achievements, Sergei explains, brewing coffee in a kitchen that wouldn't look out of place in Moscow or London. We have a combined heat and power plant that runs constantly, generating electricity and hot water simultaneously. The hot water travels through insulated underground pipes to every building in the city. These pipes must be maintained at high pressure and temperature year-round. If they freeze, the entire system fails and the city becomes uninhabitable within hours. He shows you schematics on his laptop, blueprints that reveal the complexity underneath Yakutsk's surface. The pipes run through underground corridors called utilidors, heated tunnels that also carry water, sewage, and electrical lines. Everything is bundled together because digging separate trenches in permafrost would be prohibitively expensive, and also because keeping everything in one heated corridor prevents freezing. We monitor temperature and pressure constantly, Sergei says. If we see any anomaly, a drop in pressure, unusual temperature reading, teams respond immediately. A pipe burst in winter could flood the utilidor, freeze into solid ice, and block access to all utilities. Catastrophic failure. But the heating system, impressive as it is, creates its own problems. The warm pipes melt the permafrost around them, creating zones of thawed ground that shift and settle. This is why every building sits on stilts. The pillars extend down into stable permafrost below the thaw zone, preventing the structures from sinking as the ground beneath them turns from ice to mud and back again. We call it drunken forest. When trees do this, Sergei explains, showing you photos of tilted trees in areas where permafrost has melted. Buildings can't be drunk, so we engineer around it. He takes you to his balcony, triple doors to prevent cold infiltration, and shows you the city spread below. Even in midday darkness, it's clearly a functioning metropolis. Traffic on the streets, lights in windows, planes landing at the airport. People from outside ask why we live here, Sergei muses. They think we are crazy, or maybe we don't have choice. But this is our home. My family has lived in Saka for maybe 40 generations. We know this cold, we understand it. And now we have modern comfort plus traditional knowledge. We have best of both worlds. Your next stop is a local market, an indoor facility where vendors sell everything from imported tropical fruit to locally hunted game. The contrast is surreal. Bananas and pineapples sit next to frozen reindeer carcasses, Italian wine shares shelf space with fermented mare's milk, and a vendor selling the latest Samsung smartphones operates 3 stalls down from someone selling traditional Saka knives. The woman at the meat counter, her name tag reads Ludmilla, is arranging whole frozen fish into a display that looks like modern art if modern art was made entirely of whitefish. Everything here is frozen naturally for free outside, Ludmilla explains in rough English, delighted to practice with a foreigner. Why we pay for electric freezer when we have world's biggest freezer for free? She gestures broadly toward the entrance. I keep stock outside. Bring inside only what I sell today. Is most efficient system. She also mentions that prices fluctuate wildly in winter because transport becomes difficult. Flying in fresh produce requires paying for heated cargo holds, and driving the ice roads from Yakutsk to the rest of Russia is only possible a few months per year when rivers are frozen solid enough to support truck traffic. In summer, we can drive to Magadan, to other cities, bring back supplies, she continues. But in winter, ice roads are only sometimes open, depending on weather, temperature, ice thickness. If truck breaks through ice, driver dies, cargo is lost, and we charge more to cover the risk. So banana in January costs maybe 3 times more than banana in August. Is just economics of extreme cold. Historians still argue whether Yakutsk's modern development represents adaptation or denial. Are residents adapting to extreme cold by developing technologies that work with it? Or are they in denial, trying to recreate temperate zone living in a place fundamentally unsuited for it? The answer seems to be both. The heated utilidors and stilted buildings represent adaptation, engineering solutions that acknowledge and work within permafrost constraints. But the shopping malls selling tropical fruit and the restaurants serving sushi represent a different impulse, the desire to live normally despite the abnormal environment. Sergei takes you to a local university where he occasionally lectures on cold climate engineering. The campus is connected by heated tunnels, allowing students to move between buildings without going outside, a necessity when the walk between dormitory and classroom could cause frostbite. In one lecture hall, you sit in on a class about permafrost dynamics, taught in Russian but with slides in English. The professor discusses how climate change is affecting Yakutia's infrastructure, how rising temperatures are causing permafrost to thaw in some areas, destabilizing buildings and causing roads to collapse. This is great irony, Sergei translates quietly. Global warming causes problems everywhere. Rising seas, droughts, floods. Here in Yakutia, global warming means our buildings fall down because ground they sit on is melting. We built everything on assumption that permafrost is permanent. But permanent is no longer accurate. So now we must redesign, re-engineer, find new solutions. The professor shows satellite imagery of areas where permafrost thaw has created thermokarst, landscapes pockmarked with sinkholes and collapsed ground where ice wedges melted. Some villages have been partially abandoned as buildings became uninhabitable, tilting at impossible angles or sinking into thawed mud. The projection for the next 50 years is concerning. As temperatures rise, more permafrost will thaw, requiring either massive investment in new engineering solutions or gradual abandonment of affected areas. After the lecture, you visit the Permafrost Kingdom, a tourist attraction that's also a serious scientific demonstration. It's a series of chambers carved into solid permafrost, decorated with ice sculptures and illuminated with colored lights. Part amusement park, part museum, part reminder that permafrost isn't just ground but a defining characteristic of the region. The guide, a cheerful woman named Olga who seems impervious to cold, explains that the chambers have existed for decades, requiring no refrigeration because the permafrost maintains its own temperature. This ice, these walls, they are maybe 10,000 years old, Olga says, running her hand along a wall of clear ice embedded with frozen organic matter. You are looking at time made solid, at water that fell as rain before pyramids were built, before agriculture, before cities. And it stays frozen because this is Yakutia, where cold is constant. She points out a mammoth tusk embedded in the wall, discovered during excavation. We find these all the time. Permafrost is time capsule, preserving everything. The tour includes a bar made entirely of ice where vodka is served in ice glasses. A gimmick for tourists, but the vodka is necessary because alcohol is one of the few liquids that doesn't freeze at permafrost temperatures. You drink a shot from an ice glass while standing in a minus 10 degrees Celsius chamber, and the absurdity of it, drinking alcohol in a frozen cave in the coldest city on Earth because this counts as entertainment, makes you laugh. Olga grins. This is Yakutia humor. We make joke from what would kill people other places, is how we stay sane. That evening, Sergei takes you to a modern restaurant in central Yakutsk, a sleek establishment with floor-to-ceiling windows, triple-paned, heated, and a menu that features both traditional sake dishes and international cuisine. You order stroganina, of course, but also Italian pasta and French wine, eating meals that come from 6 different continents while outside the temperature hovers around minus 63 degrees Celsius. The waitress, a young sake woman dressed in contemporary fashion, explains that all their fish is locally caught. All their reindeer and horse meat is from sake herders, but everything else is flown in weekly from warmer regions. We are modern people, she says, but we still eat traditional food because it's good food is what our bodies need here. My grandmother thinks it's funny that I eat stroganina in fancy restaurant when she eats same thing at home for free. She laughs. But I like fancy restaurant, like both traditional and modern. Why choose? The question hangs in the air as you eat. Why choose, indeed? Yakutsk represents a synthesis, traditional knowledge about surviving extreme cold combined with modern technology to make that survival more comfortable. The old ways aren't abandoned, they're supplemented. People still know how to gut a reindeer and build a snow shelter, but they also have heated apartments and smartphones. The knowledge that you could survive using ancestral techniques provides security even when you're living in modern comfort. After dinner, Sergei drives you through the city at night, which looks like night but is also day, because in December darkness is constant. You pass the Lenin statue, present in nearly every Soviet-era city, encrusted with frost and looking appropriately grim. You pass parks where children play on heated playgrounds, their parents watching from heated shelters, everyone bundled like miniature astronauts. You pass the State Opera and Ballet Theater, because even in minus 60 degrees Celsius, culture continues, performances happen, life proceeds. You know what makes me proud? Sergei says as he drives. Is not just that we survive here. Many places are hard. Many people survive difficult conditions. What makes me proud is that we thrive here. We have universities, theaters, art, music. We have innovation. Some of best cold climate engineers in world are from Yakutsk because we must solve problems nobody else faces. We take what is harshest environment for human civilization and we build anyway. This is very human thing, I think. We see impossible place and we say, okay, but what if we try anyway? Back at Sergei's apartment, you look out the window at the ice fog glowing with city lights, at the buildings standing on their stilts against the permafrost, at the cars driving despite temperatures that would crack their engine blocks if the engines were ever turned off. You think about the diamond mines north of here, where workers extract gems from permafrost using techniques that combine cutting-edge technology with traditional sake knowledge of frozen ground. You think about the villages you visited, where life continues in ways that would be recognizable to ancestors from 1,000 years ago. You think about the university students learning to engineer solutions for a warming world that paradoxically threatens their cold-adapted infrastructure. Yakutia shouldn't work. A major city at minus 65 degrees Celsius, villages at minus 71 degrees Celsius, people raising children and living full lives in conditions that killed early polar explorers. It's absurd. But it does work, through a combination of ancient wisdom, modern engineering, and sheer bloody-minded refusal to quit. Tomorrow you'll fly out, returning to temperate zones where winter is an inconvenience rather than an existential threat. But tonight, you're still here, still experiencing the strange contradiction of extreme cold and human warmth, of a place where survival requires both cutting-edge technology and the knowledge that, in the worst case, you can still gut an animal and crawl inside to survive. The fact that people have smartphones and also know how to survive using caribou intestines as clothing, that's not a contradiction. That's Yakutia. Your final morning in Yakutia arrives with a temperature reading of minus 70 degrees Celsius. A parting gift from a place that doesn't believe in gentle farewells. You're back at Nikolai and Sardana's house, preparing to return to Yakutsk for your flight out, and the question that's been building throughout your time here finally crystallizes. What does this place, this people, this extreme edge of human habitation teach us about being human? Nikolai sits by the stove, mending a piece of harness with the kind of casual competence that comes from a lifetime of self-sufficiency. You go back to warm place soon, he observes, not looking up from his work. You will tell people about Yakutia, about cold, about how we live. What you will say is a good question, and you've been struggling with the answer. The easy response is to focus on the extremes, the temperature, the darkness, the dead horses as emergency shelters, because those make good stories, shock value for audiences who've never experienced real cold. But the truth is more complex and more interesting. I'll tell them, you say slowly, working it out as you speak, that Yakutia is about adaptation, not conquest. That you don't defeat the cold, you negotiate with it. That survival here requires both ancient knowledge and modern technology, and that neither alone is sufficient. Nikolai nods, still focused on his harness. Is good answer. Many people from outside, they think we are either primitive people living in past, or we are modern people who have conquered nature with technology. Both wrong. We are people who understand our environment very well, who take what works from old ways and what works from new ways, and who survive because we are flexible, not because we are stubborn. He pauses. Well, also because we are stubborn, but flexible stubborn. Sardana joins the conversation, bringing tea and the last of the horse meat from yesterday's meal. You know what I think is most important lesson? She asks. Is that humans can live anywhere if they respect place they live. We respect cold, we don't fight it, don't pretend it doesn't exist, don't try to ignore it. We build our lives around it, work with it, use it when we can. The permafrost cellars, the ice roads, the frozen food, these are not fighting cold. These are using cold as tool. This is actually a profound point that environmental psychologists have studied. Cultures that thrive in extreme environments, whether Arctic cold, desert heat, or high altitude, share a common trait. They accept their environment's constraints as given conditions and build their society around them rather than trying to remake the environment to match some idealized standard. The Saka didn't try to warm Yakutia. They became people who could live in cold Yakutia. But is changing now, Nikolai adds, and there's concern in his voice. Young people, they grow up with internet, with TV showing them Moscow, Paris, Los Angeles. They see warm places, easy places, places where you don't lose toes to frostbite, where you can go outside without 40 layers. Some leave, move to cities in South. Cannot blame them. Life here is hard, always hard. But when they leave, they take knowledge with them and knowledge dies. This brain drain is a real phenomenon documented by researchers studying Arctic communities. As modern communication technology makes the outside world more visible and accessible, young people increasingly choose to leave for places where survival doesn't require constant vigilance against freezing to death. The population of rural Yakutia has been declining slowly but steadily, concentrated in a few larger villages and in Yakutsk itself, while smaller settlements are gradually abandoned. My daughter lives in Moscow now, Sardana says quietly. She visits sometimes in summer, but hasn't been here in winter for 5 years. Says it's too cold, too dark, too isolated. She has good job, warm apartment, doesn't have to butcher horses or dig permafrost cellars. I am happy for her, but also sad. She is losing connection to this place, to these skills, to this way of being. But Sergei, Nikolai's nephew from Yakutsk, represents a different possibility, the synthesis of traditional and modern, the engineer who understands both thermodynamics and permafrost spirits. He's agnostic on whether the spirits are real, but respectful just in case. His generation is finding ways to remain in Yakutia while also participating in global culture, using technology to bridge the isolation while maintaining connection to traditional knowledge. Climate change adds another variable. You mention, thinking of the university lecture you attended. If permafrost melts, if temperatures rise even a few degrees, what happens to Yakutia? Nikolai shrugs. Maybe is easier. Maybe winters are only -50 instead of -70. Maybe we can grow more food, have longer summers. But also, maybe everything we built falls down because permafrost melts. Maybe rivers flood different. Ice roads are unreliable. Seasons we depend on shift in ways we cannot predict. Change is always hard, even when change seems better. Historians still argue whether traditional Arctic cultures will survive climate change or be destroyed by it. The optimistic view is that these are adaptive cultures with centuries of experience responding to environmental shifts. They'll adapt again. The pessimistic view is that modern infrastructure built on permafrost will fail catastrophically. that traditional knowledge calibrated to specific temperature ranges will become irrelevant, and that the combination will force migration and cultural dissolution. The reality will probably be somewhere in between messy, complicated, and different for each community. You spend the afternoon helping with chores, learning final skills. Sardana shows you how to identify good ice versus dangerous ice on rivers. Thickness is obvious, but color and clarity matter too, as does the presence of snow cover, which insulates ice and can hide thin spots. She shows you how to test ice by striking it with a pole, listening for the pitch. Solid ice sounds different than ice over water or air pockets. This knowledge saved my father's life twice, she says. He was crossing river, ice looked good, but he tested first, heard wrong sound, went different way. Other hunters who didn't test fell through, died. Small knowledge, big difference. Nikolai demonstrates emergency fire starting techniques you haven't seen yet. Using char cloth, using flint and steel, using a bow drill to create friction fire in extreme cold. It's possible, but extremely difficult because cold wood doesn't create heat as efficiently through friction. Every method has advantages, he explains. Matches are fast but fail when wet or too cold. Flint and steel works always but requires practice. Friction fire requires no equipment but takes long time and is difficult. Best survival plan is knowing all methods, having multiple tools, never depending on only one technique. This redundancy principle appears everywhere in Yakutian survival culture. Multiple layers of clothing, multiple sources of heat, multiple food caches, multiple survival techniques. It's the opposite of modern efficiency, which seeks to optimize by removing redundancy, and it's precisely this redundancy that enables survival in an environment where single points of failure are fatal. As you prepare to leave, Nikolai gives you a gift, a pair of the reindeer leg mittens he showed you earlier. These are real Saka mittens, he says. Not souvenir, not decoration. Real working mittens that will keep your hands warm in any cold you ever face. When you wear them, remember what they mean. Remember that people lived here for 1,000 years, survived and thrived using knowledge passed down, refined, tested by death. These mittens are not just warm gloves. They are information stored in object form. They are technology that works. You're genuinely touched, and the mittens are indeed remarkably warm. Your hands heat up immediately when you put them on, even in the -70 degrees Celsius air of the morning. They're also slightly grotesque, with the reindeer hooves still attached, swinging slightly as you move. But that's the point, isn't it? Survival isn't always pretty. It's effective. The drive back to Yakutsk is contemplative. You watch the landscape pass. Frozen rivers, skeletal forests, the occasional village smoke rising straight up in the still air, and you think about resilience. Not resilience as a buzzword or corporate training module, but resilience as a lived practice, a daily negotiation with conditions that want to kill you. The people of Yakutia have survived here for 1,000 years not because they're genetically superior or blessed by deities, but because they developed a culture of practical knowledge, mutual support, and clear-eyed acceptance of risk. They know that mistakes kill, that preparation matters, that community is survival, and that sometimes, when everything else fails, you get a horse and climb inside because pragmatism beats dignity when the alternative is freezing to death. At the airport, waiting for your flight to Moscow where temperatures are a tropical -15 degrees Celsius. You overhear tourists exclaiming about the cold. They've been here for 3 days, did the tourist circuit, the Permafrost Kingdom, the Mammoth Museum, a quick village visit, and they're ready to leave, ready for warmth and comfort. I can't believe people actually live here, one says. It's inhuman, but it's not inhuman. It's profoundly human. It's humans looking at an environment that should kill them and saying, we'll live here anyway, then spending 1,000 years developing the knowledge to make that possible. It's humans combining traditional wisdom with modern technology, creating a synthesis that's more effective than either alone. It's humans building communities in the darkness, sharing meat when hunting is good, supporting neighbors when luck runs bad, because isolation in extreme cold is death. The flight takes off and you watch Yakutsk recede below. A grid of lights on permafrost, a city that shouldn't exist, home to 350,000 people who wake up every morning to temperatures that would kill them in hours without shelter. From above, in the comfort of a heated airplane cabin, it looks impossible, absurd, a violation of common sense. But you've been down there. You've felt the cold that turns your eyelashes into frost and makes the air itself feel solid. You've built shelter in snow, made fire in impossible cold, eaten frozen horse meat and drunk fermented mare's milk. You've sat in houses heated by stoves that must never go out, walked on ice roads over frozen rivers, learned to read snow and ice like text. You've heard the stories of Uncle Dmitri in his dead horse, of children wrapped in caribou intestines, of hunters using animal carcasses for emergency warmth. You've learned that survival in extreme environments requires three things: knowledge that's been tested and refined over generations, willingness to adapt and innovate when conditions change, and above all, the stubborn refusal to quit even when quitting would be easier, more comfortable, more rational. The plane climbs higher, and Yakutia disappears into the darkness below. But you carry it with you now, not just memories of extreme cold and desperate survival techniques, but a deeper understanding of human adaptability, of our species' remarkable ability to not just survive but thrive in conditions that should be impossible. You think about the mittens in your bag, made from reindeer legs, warm and functional and slightly absurd. You think about Nikolai and Sardana and Sergei and everyone else who lives in this frozen place, who will wake up tomorrow to minus 70 degrees Celsius and go about their lives, working, studying, raising children, arguing about politics, falling in love, making art, doing all the things humans do everywhere, except doing them in a place where the environment is actively hostile to human life. And you think about the core lesson of Yakutia, the message that applies whether you live in Siberia or Singapore, whether you face literal cold or metaphorical winters. Humans survive by adapting to conditions, not by denying them. We thrive by combining old wisdom with new tools. We endure by supporting each other, by sharing knowledge, by accepting that sometimes survival requires doing things that are uncomfortable, undignified, or downright grotesque. We survive by being flexible, stubborn, as Nikolai said, by respecting our environment while refusing to be defeated by it, by knowing when to use ancient techniques and when to embrace modern technology, by understanding that redundancy is safety, that community is survival, and that the knowledge to gut a horse and use its warmth to stay alive is worth preserving, even if, especially if, you never need to use it. The plane levels off, heading southwest toward Moscow, toward warmth, toward normal. You settle into your seat, already missing the strange beauty of Yakutia's frozen darkness, already planning to return someday, already wondering how you'll explain this place to people who've never felt real cold. But some things can't be explained, only experienced. Some knowledge can't be taught, only earned. And some places can't be understood from the outside, only lived. Yakutia is all of these things. And now, having been there, having survived there, you're different. Not dramatically different. You haven't achieved enlightenment or had a mystical transformation. But you're different in the way that everyone who faces genuine hardship and overcomes it is different. More confident in your resilience, more respectful of expertise, more appreciative of warmth and comfort and community. You've learned that humans are capable of surviving anywhere, enduring anything, adapting to conditions that seem impossible from the outside. You've learned that the margin between life and death can be as thin as knowing which ice is safe to cross, as simple as keeping a fire burning, as brutal as crawling into a dead animal for warmth. You've learned that survival is beautiful and terrible and mundane and heroic, often all at once. You've learned what it means to live at minus 71 degrees Celsius. And you've learned, perhaps most importantly, that you're capable of more than you thought, that your comfortable life in temperate zones has left untested reserves of resilience and adaptability that emerge when conditions demand them. The knowledge sits quietly inside you as the plane flies on through the night, carrying you away from the coldest inhabited place on Earth, toward warmth and ease and the ordinary concerns of ordinary life. But you'll remember the cold, the darkness, the people who thrive despite both. You'll remember the lessons of Yakutia, not just the survival techniques, but the deeper wisdom about human adaptability, about the power of accumulated knowledge, about the importance of community in the face of existential threats. And on cold winter nights, wherever you are, whatever challenges you face, you'll remember that there are people in Yakutia waking up to minus 70 degrees Celsius, going about their lives, surviving and thriving in conditions that would kill you in minutes. And if they can do that, you can handle whatever winter you're facing. The plane hums steadily, carrying you through darkness toward dawn, toward warmth, toward the life waiting for you beyond this frozen edge of the world. Your eyes grow heavy, your breathing slows, your mind drifts towards sleep. And as you drift, you feel a deep, quiet gratitude for the warmth surrounding you, for the knowledge you've gained, for the people who shared their lives and their wisdom, for the experience of witnessing human resilience at its most extreme and most ordinary. Yakutia is behind you now, but it's also inside you, a cold, clear truth about what humans can endure, what we can adapt to, what we're capable of when survival demands everything we have. Sleep comes gently, carrying you toward dreams of ice and fire, of frozen rivers and warm hearths, of the eternal dance between cold that kills and warmth that saves, played out daily in the coldest place humans call home. The journey is ending. The lessons remain. And somewhere far below, in the frozen darkness of Yakutia, the Saka people continue their 1,000-year conversation with the cold, surviving, adapting, thriving, stubborn and flexible, traditional and modern, impossible and utterly, magnificently real. Sweet dreams, traveler. You've earned them,